This is the secret story of nutmeg.
Once you become a believer, you see too much that you click over. You click over somehow. Once your mind is certain that this cannot be bullshit, this it's just too much. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And if you keep looking, that's where you'll go. I've seen other people do it, mate. Down they go. They're into a gold mine.
For centuries, the seed of the Myristica fragrans tree, nutmeg, also known as muscat, has been sought after by people all over the world for its perceived medicinal and magical powers. It has been called the spice of life, or the spice of kings. Thought to have cured the plague, have aphrodisiac qualities, and even cure flatulence, nutmeg was considered a symbol of wealth and status over thousands of years, instigating the birth of capitalism, globalism, and violent genocide and war. But why was this spice really so valuable? The answer may surprise you. Nutmeg's qualities and its story could be just what we need to cure our modern-day ailments. We want to explore its incredible history and the mystery that surrounds its real value to society over time. Welcome to the secret story of nutmeg, the mysteries and histories of a seed that shaped the world. The nutmeg that we know is essentially a seed kernel. True nutmeg, Myristica fragrans, grows on an evergreen tree that can reach 18 metres tall. They mature at about 20 years of age. They start fruiting at about 5 to 8 years. Only the female trees bear fruit, and it is important to have a male tree nearby. The fruit ripens around 6 to 9 months after flowering. It is gold in colour, and it is about the size of a small apple. Trad calls it the golden apple. The fruit is used for jellies, jams and juice in Indonesia and Malaysia. When the fruit is ripe, it splits to reveal a vivid crimson lace-like casing over a dark brown egg-like shell. This crimson case is called mace. The mace is wrapped around the nutmeg casing like a bright red warning, enveloping it, protecting it, a distraction with its colour or a promise. Mace is also used as a spice, more delicate than the actual nutmeg, with a sweeter, less pungent odour. It is prized off the nutmeg casing and dried when harvesting. Then we have the nutmeg case, which is dried and then cracked to reveal the nutmeg itself inside. It looks like a brain, the way a walnut does, but less ridgy, if that's a word. Cutting it open reveals veins of darker matter. Layer upon layer upon layer. It's amazing how many stories this little fruit and its seed inside contains. "300 years after the death of Jesus Christ, a Roman emperor converted to Christianity. Constantine the Great then worked on making Byzantium, a city already 1,000 years old, the capital of the Roman Empire, renaming it Constantinopolis, or as we know it, Constantinople. The city, now known as Istanbul, sits on the Bosporus Strait, one of the original maritime chokepoints, linking the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. One side of the city is in Europe, the other in Asia. Controlling this controlled the ancient world. For nearly all trade routes from east to west would pass through this point. I'm only telling you this because I'm trying to tell you the story of the island of Run. I'm trying. In all truth, I've been trying to for the last episode and a half. I told this to Trad last night and he laughed. That's what happens, brother. I needed to know why, for thousands of years, the Bandonese had complete control over their nutmeg, and then seemingly, all of a sudden, well, relatively, Europeans are swarming all over them. But how do we know the Bandonese were trading nutmeg for thousands of years? We will explore this in more detail in later episodes. However, we know from Vedic texts that the nutmeg was used in India at least 1000 to 1500 BCE. There is evidence of Chinese trade with the Bandonese from at least the 5th century CE, and Roman texts by Pliny the Elder mention mace around the 1st century. And of course, I found that map. So without looking too deeply, we know the Bandonese were trading nutmeg for a very long time before Europeans arrived. But why did the Europeans come? And why is this important? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Bandonese were victims of genocide. A huge part of this podcast and Trad's premise is that the use of nutmeg for its, let's just say, spiritual qualities was and is mostly hidden from the mainstream. Remember, this is about the histories and mysteries of a seed that shaped the world. So back to the histories and Run, if we ever get there. I was talking about Constantinople, which remained the capital of the Roman Empire, more commonly now in this era called the Byzantine Empire, for approximately 1,000 years until it was first attacked by the Fourth Crusade. Sponsored by the Venetians, the Fourth Crusade was about seizing control of this choke point. But it was for the Venetians that they did this, not ultimately for themselves. They owed the Venetians a great deal of money for the ships they used to reach the Holy Land. They were in deep debt. They needed to sack Constantinople to pay back that debt. The Crusaders sacked a Christian city to save their crusade. Ultimately, this was good for the Venetians, as because of their location at the head of the Adriatic Sea, amongst other reasons, they were the inroad to Europe, and now Constantinople was significantly weakened in its influence. The Venetians had much greater power over everything coming into and out of the Mediterranean and into Europe. They flourished. However, in hindsight, the Venetians had to take advantage of this time because it was the start of a decline of Eastern goods entering the West by this route. The route was a combination of land and short sea routes at the time, an arduous journey. The Spice Islands location, i.e. that of the Bandas and the Moluccas, where cloves originally came from, was a secret to the Western world. One of the primary reasons the Bandonese maintained their monopoly on nutmeg. That has been the story. If we look at trade from this direction, we see indicators of who has been there, why and where. Indonesia has the largest Islamic population in the world. Arab and Persian traders were also bringing spices to the world even before they practiced Islam. However, before that, local animism beliefs and religions were mixed with imported Buddhism and Hinduism. so the people from the Indian subcontinent were also present. Perhaps they were the first traders in the area, seeking the secret spices. But maybe this is actually the wrong way to look at this. It's a bit presumptuous to think that somehow we, and by this I mean us outsiders, came looking first. Which I must admit, right up until now, I've been guilty of, when in actual fact, it may have been the other way around. The people of Southeast Asia, broadly known as Austronesians, left their islands and travelled across the sea themselves, establishing trade routes and colonising lands as far away as Africa, Polynesia, and there have even been conjectures about them getting to the Americas. So was it the other way around? Is it like that the Austronesians went overseas on sales trips and trade missions, and pretty bloody epic sales trips, mind you, to market what they knew they had, that nobody else did? Nutmeg? Well, and cloves, of course. But this is the Nutmeg podcast, remember? And all the while, keeping where the nutmeg came from a secret? Look, I'm probably oversimplifying that, I know. But the crux of it is that the trade routes may well have been first established by the people of the very regions where the spices were grown. Perhaps they pushed outwards, while India, China, and the Arabians reached back towards them, meeting halfway, or at least as far as the Bandanese would allow. From there, the great inland routes began to take shape, carrying spice into Europe and deep into Asia. So perhaps what we call the secrecy of nutmeg's origins and of other spices was never really secrecy at all, but destiny. The trade was shaped not by the seekers who came chasing it across the seas, but by the keepers who held it at the source. In the case of nutmeg, the Bandanese, whose place at the world's edge became a stage where myth, commerce and power were all entwined. I say the world's edge, but even though I am Australian, this is still probably a European viewpoint. To the Bandanese, it is their centre. This is the truth for them. And for Trad, for whom I'm trying to tell this story of Run, it is as well. So let's make our way back to Run, well, back to Constantinople. The Byzantines, who had been so influential in allowing this trade to flourish, had now become destabilised, to the extent that it ultimately fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1452. This is seen today as the final collapse of the Roman Empire. The free trade which the Venetians had been enjoying for centuries was now over. The Ottoman introduced taxes over the vast area of trade routes they now controlled, and the vast treasures of the East, including nutmeg, slowed to a trickle, and of course, their price skyrocketed. It is here I want to apologise. This is such an abridged version of events, and it does no justice to the thousands of people who suffered in the name of greed. We tell these stories, these histories, with such abandon for human suffering that it is almost a sickness. The sands of time, distance, ideology, and cultural differences somehow make us insensitive to the events of human pain. And it is not just a thing of the past. We see it today. Watching the news as we eat our nightly meal, people like ourselves fighting for their lives because of someone else's greed. One of the primary reasons I'm following and trying to interpret Trad's belief in the mysteries of nutmeg is that ultimately he will say we are telling the story of empathy, the ultimate metaphor of the original metaphor. The nutmeg story is the empathy story. Even as I'm reading this that I've written, I find it quite challenging that I'm asking you to believe this. I'm not sure if I quite believe everything yet myself, but when I listen to Trad's steadfast passion for the story of Nutmeg, I have to give it a go.
Well, when you discover the secret this thing has, which I believe I've got, because I see other people's lives, I think, wow, I really did go down a gold mine, mate. It's given me a great insight into, how this thing's working. I think it allows you to see the truth a little more because you now have the original truth.
Yeah, well,
you know what I mean? Until you've got an original truth, you can't really know your mind can't really know what the truth is. And, when we're born, they give us a lie, like Santa Claus and Easter Bunny and everything. They give us a metaphor for a lie, but no one gives us a metaphor for the truth. So we can never know the truth because we haven't got a metaphor for it. But once you know the original truth, it changes things for some reason. Once you become a believer, you see too much that you click over. You click over somehow. Once your mind is certain that this cannot be bullshit. It's just too much. You know what I mean? And if you keep looking, that's where you'll go. I've seen other people do it, mate. Down they go. But they're into a gold mine.
So I'm listening and I'm learning. And I'm about to learn how the Europeans found the Banda Islands and the nutmeg. And it was the Portuguese who were the first there in the early 1500s. Led by Prince Henry of Portugal, also known as Prince Henry the Navigator, the Portuguese had been exploring the high seas in the early 15th century. Henry had been granted all profits from any trades that were made on areas he, inverted commas, discovered. There was a strong drive to keep pushing expeditions whilst he was alive between 1394 and 1460. Portugal's location had no real access to the Mediterranean. They were an ocean-facing region, and the Kingdom of Portugal was looking for a way to get to the Spice Islands because now, with Constantinople being taken over, the spice trade had become all the more valuable to access. The Mediterranean was also a dangerous place for outside nations. It was highly controlled and hotly contested. With advances in maritime technology, the Portuguese had a new style of ship, the caravel, which was faster, and because of its use of lateen sails, triangle sails, and a shallow draft, it was also easier to navigate shallow seas, as well as being able to sail to windward, something the square riggers at the time couldn't do as well. It was the ship that marked the beginning of the European Age of Discovery. In this new age of discovery, Prince Henry had been granted all profits from any trades that were made on areas they discovered. There was a strong drive to continue expeditions while he was alive, and well after. So for 80-odd years, the Portuguese edged their way around Africa and into the Indian Ocean. They had found a new way to India and pressed on, each new voyage edging closer and closer to the source. These first ships, the caravels, were only around 40 to 60 feet long. It is so hard to imagine that just riches alone drove these men to sail into the unknown on tiny ships to find the source of this nice-smelling seed. The odds of surviving the trip and getting home were very, very slim. But men left their homes and chose to go. Anyway, as the Portuguese pushed on around Africa and into the Indian Ocean towards India where they thought the source of nutmeg was, the Genoan Columbus persuaded the Catholic monarchs of Spain that he could find another way to the source of spice. A western route. He too used caravels and larger versions more suited to the ocean crossings, the carrack, which had a combination of sails, lantern and square. Yes, America was encountered by Columbus because they were looking for the sources of spices, the land of nutmeg and other spice. The source's secret location was literally shaping the world, literally manifesting the world as we know it. I'm starting to see more and more of how Trad, who set off on his own voyage of discovery because of what happened on the island of Run, has been gripped by this story. Trad often says to me, "You can't tell me there wasn't something else going on besides the pure greed for trade, that men would jump into tiny ships and travel to a place akin to going to Mars today. In fact, probably more distant in their minds, to look for the origin of nutmeg. There was something else going on, brother. Think about it." I'm trying to find clues. The things that Trad has said to me at first were far-fetched, a bit like nutmeg itself. Far-fetched. A long way to go to find it. Nutmeg, it's the original metaphor. But let's look at why we are told nutmeg at the time was so valuable. One of the primary reasons we believe demonstrates nutmeg's demand among medieval Europeans is that it was considered a cure for the plague, which ravaged Europe from the mid-1300s until outbreaks in the 18th century. Scholars still argue today about exactly what it was, most believing it was a disease transmitted by fleas. Yersinia pestis, which was passed from rats to humans. Over time, physicians recommended that patients wear a sack of nutmeg around their necks to ward it off. Or the quintessential image of the plague we recognise is the beaked mask that was supposedly containing herbs and spices, including nutmeg, to ward off the plague. However, these were worn much later than when the Portuguese were setting off to find the nutmeg. Now we know nutmeg has been thought to possess insecticidal properties, particularly for its compound myristicin. Myristicin has been studied a little for this, and perhaps it was shown to repel fleas during this time and therefore recognised as a cure. However, at the time, the reports we can find of what people actually believed caused the plague were theories such as a conjunction of planets causing a great pestilence in the air, a miasma, or it was simply the will of God. I am trying to find information that would have people of the time believing that nutmeg would actually cure the plague. But if they believed that it was the will of God, perhaps the use of it during this time was more about the belief in miasma being the cause of the spread of the disease. Miasma is or was a condition of the air being rotten, and that making it smell better would stop the breath taker from catching the plague. Imagine this belief pitted against the smell of death that would have permeated the air during these times. Let us remember that during the first Black Death, over 10 years or so in the middle of the 14th century, between 25 and 50 million people died. And in total, in Asia and Europe, perhaps 200 million people. So many people died that it is now believed that the reforestation that occurred as the fields grew over with the new vegetation decarbonated the air and caused a mini ice age in this period. Oh my God, I didn't expect to be here. Looking further into the plague, there is a belief that it originated somewhere in Asia. This is argued whether it be Eurasia or as far away as China, and entered Europe through, yep, you guessed it, Constantinople. It followed the trade routes to arrive, and it continued to follow the trade routes once it entered Europe. However, I would like to point out that this theory is hotly contested. Scholars are debating its origins and spread, but the fact remains that it appears to have first been described as entering Europe through Constantinople, and then disseminated along the trade routes within. Sound familiar? But we still haven't got to run. It's funny, I've been trying to find a reason to get there for the Europeans, and in this case, the Portuguese. And if you have been with me so far, the reasons would be, for the supply side, the total monopoly of spice by the Venetians was due to the slow decline of the Byzantine Empire, which drove up prices. The shut-off of supply was almost completed by the Ottomans taking over Constantinople, and the secrecy of the Banda's location was a catalyst for its discovery. But I'm not so sure of the demand side. I'm not sure about the plague being a super source of demand, because the science at the time of the first outbreaks was that there were outbreaks because of the will of God and or celestial and planetary alignments, and I find no mention of nutmeg being anything close to being a cure until the 17th century. Was there a deeper reason, deeper than pestilence, death and disease, that the Spice Islands, and in particular the home of nutmeg, needed to be found? Was it purely greed? For the price had gone up astronomically since the fall of Constantinople. So what I'm trying to work out here is, was it purely the lack of supply which drove up the demand for nutmeg, which drove the prices higher than gold, which attracted the Europeans to find the source of the spice, the Banda Islands? Or was there, as Trad tells me, much deeper reasons for the nutmeg to be found? Something to do with the Myristica oil found in the nutmeg. Something to do with empathy. I kind of get it, but he keeps throwing me off with other stories, with riddles, that at the moment take me way off track. But to Trad, these things are important. Things like Puff the Magic Dragon, the Phantom comics.
And then go and read an old Phantom comic. With the banda, the pygmy banda that look after him, you know? Yeah. The small people from Banda. Oh my God. You have a look, you start to see that certain people knew about this. They could not have written that story without knowing about the main story, you know? They've just got a snippet of the story, that's all they've done. Each person has taken a snippet and told us a snippet of it. Yeah. But nothing in whole. Nothing in whole, yeah.
Well, would there ever be anything in whole?
It's coming, brother. The story in whole, all the bits put together.
Jeez.
So here I am now, halfway to Run, trying to tell the story of the Manhattan Transfer, which, by the way, is possibly the most well-known nutmeg-connected story there is. And we will get to it in this podcast, believe it or not. But Trad's throwing me stories and riddles, and I'm peering into holes that I either shouldn't be or I don't want to, for fear of not getting out again. In order for me to stay on track, I need to ask Trad something.
The ultimate premise of this whole story that needs to be told, in a nutshell, what is it?
That we have a saviour. It's there. Always has been there. And now we should use this saviour wisely. It shouldn't have been removed from us for safekeeping, because we abuse it. We're given empathy for free. And, you know, empathy given for free, you haven't earned it. And so it was taken from us by a select few so that we learn to earn empathy. And then the world can live in peace. But we should have just used it wisely and to people that require it at certain times in their lives, instead of taking it completely from us. And, you know? Okay.
Speaking of, let's get back to Run. finding the Banda Islands and the source of our spice, more valuable than gold for whatever reasons they may have been. I trust we will start finding those reasons sooner or later. So, many Portuguese expeditions in their carracks edged their way around the Cape of Good Hope, with many ships lost and the deaths of many sailors, until finally Vasco da Gama reached India in 1498. Hope was becoming a reality for the Portuguese. This was the culmination of all the early expeditions along the African coast, supported by the Portuguese monarchy and funded by a new trade that was developing from these voyages along that coastline, the trade in people. And what we call Brazil was also discovered as Portuguese sailors headed west across the Atlantic to avoid the dreaded doldrums near the equator in the East Atlantic. The transatlantic slave trade developed, which would fund future explorations to the secret Spice Islands and would forever change the world. It seems to me at this time, empathy was seriously lacking. This is the secret story of Nutmeg.